They say John Henry was born in the shadow of the mountains, on a night when thunder cracked the sky and the earth trembled like a drum. Rain poured through the trees, soaking the cabins and tents of a railroad camp somewhere in the dark hills of West Virginia. In one of those shacks, a woman cried out in labor, her voice mixing with the storm, fierce and unbroken. When the baby came, lightning split the clouds, and the midwife swore she saw the child's small hand clenched tight, as if already holding something. "A hammer," she whispered, crossing herself. And the story began there. John Henry's father was a steel driver, a man who swung a hammer all day long to drive steel rods into rock, clearing paths for the new railroad. He had arms like tree trunks and a back bent from years of hard labor. His mother washed clothes by the river, singing songs to make the work lighter. From them, John learned two things early: how to work until sweat burned his eyes, and how to sing so the pain didn't feel so heavy. By the time he could walk, he was already dragging a stick across the ground like a hammer, tapping out the rhythm he'd heard from the tunnels. Tink, tink, boom. The heartbeat of a working man. As he grew, the camp workers used to gather by the fire after long days, telling stories to keep their spirits alive. They'd talk about the steam drill, a new kind of machine coming down from the cities, powered by fire and gears, that could dig through mountains faster than any crew of men. Some laughed at the idea. Some shivered. They all knew what it meant. Fewer jobs, less dignity, less need for human hands. But little John didn't understand that yet. He only knew that when the men sang and swung their hammers, the earth itself seemed to move to their rhythm. He wanted that power. He wanted to be part of that song. By 10, he was tall as a grown man's chest. By 12, he could outlift men twice his size. When his father died in a cave-in, John took up his hammer and said nothing for a long time. The next morning, the foreman found him by the collapsed tunnel, tapping stone by himself. Slow, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. When asked what he was doing, the boy said, "Finishing my father's work." And from that day, the men began to whisper, "The boy ain't like the rest of us. He's got thunder in his blood." The years rolled by like the endless hills. The Civil War came and went, leaving scars on the land and on men's hearts. Freedmen like John Henry sought work wherever they could find it: railroads, mines, logging camps. It was hard work, dangerous and thankless, but it was honest, and it paid enough to eat. John drifted from camp to camp, always with that same hammer slung over his shoulder, the one his father had used, worn smooth by years of sweat and steel. Some said he slept with it beside him, the way a soldier sleeps with his rifle. Some said he could drive a steel pin into solid rock with a single swing. Others said that was just talk. But those who'd seen him work never doubted. When John swung that hammer, it wasn't just muscle, it was music. Each strike had rhythm, like the call and response songs the men sang while they worked. "This old hammer, it rings like silver. This old hammer, it shines like gold." And the sound carried through the valleys, a hymn of labor and pride. There was something different about John, something more than strength. He carried himself with quiet dignity, never boasting, never cruel. He helped the younger men find their rhythm, taught them to breathe between swings so they wouldn't break their backs. He told them, "Don't fight the hammer, dance with it." At night, when the campfires burned low and the crickets sang, John would sit apart, staring at the stars. He'd talk sometimes about the future, the steel rails stretching farther west, through mountains, across plains, all the way to the ocean. He said it like a man seeing the map of his own destiny. "Someday," he'd murmur, "these tracks will cover the whole country, and a man's song will travel farther than his feet ever could." The others laughed, but there was respect in their eyes, because when John Henry spoke, even the wind seemed to pause. One summer evening, as the sun fell red behind the ridges, a group of company men rode in from the east. They wore clean shirts, polished boots, and looks that didn't belong in the dirt. They spoke of new machines, steam-powered drills that could bore through stone faster than any crew of men. Progress, they called it. Efficiency. John listened from a distance, arms folded, his hammer resting against his leg. He didn't say a word. But that night, the campfire songs sounded different, slower, sadder, as if something sacred was being taken away. He sat in silence long after the others slept. In the darkness, the storm clouds gathered again. And somewhere deep inside him, that old thunder stirred. By the time John Henry reached manhood, his body had become a monument of work. Broad shoulders like quarried stone, arms carved by 1,000 hammer swings. The old men said he didn't walk like other men. He moved as if he carried the rhythm of the earth in his bones. The railroad stretched farther every year, twisting like a steel serpent across the American land, from coal mines to river crossings, through mountains and valleys where only wind had ever passed before. And wherever the rail went, men like John followed black men, Irishmen, freed slaves, poor farmers, all bound by the same song of labor. At dawn, the work began before the mist had lifted. Teams of steel drivers lined up along the cliffside, 2 men to a hammer, another to hold the steel rod. Each strike had to land perfectly, or the rod would bend, or worse, break and send shards flying. It was the kind of work that tested a man's rhythm more than his muscle. But John Henry didn't just drive steel, he conducted it. When his hammer rose, so did the men's voices. When it fell, the mountain answered. Swing low, boys. Don't lose the line. We'll drive that steel till the end of time. The sound rolled through the valley, hammers clanging in unison, boots stomping in dust, sweat shining like oil under the morning sun. The company men called it noise. The workers called it music. One afternoon, a new recruit named Samuel, barely 17, dropped his hammer after missing a swing. The tool bounced against the rocks, nearly hitting his foot. The foreman barked curses, ready to throw the boy off the crew. John stepped between them, calm as stone. Let him be, he said. He just ain't found the beat yet. Then he picked up the hammer, handed it back, and told Samuel, Close your eyes. Don't fight it. Listen. John began to hum, slow and low the tune that lived in the tunnels, steady as a heart. Samuel swung with him once, twice, 3 times, and the blows landed clean. The rod sank into the mountain like it had been waiting for them. John grinned. See? Ain't about power. It's about rhythm. From that day on, Samuel called him the man who taught the hammer to sing. As the months passed, talk of the steam drill grew louder. Foremen brought pamphlets from the cities, drawings of machines with pistons and gears, said to work twice as fast as any man. They said soon there'd be no need for steel drivers at all. The company men smiled when they said it, like they were proud to replace flesh with iron. John didn't smile. He studied the pictures, those metal beasts breathing fire and smoke. He said nothing, but his hands tightened around the hammer handle. At night, the men argued by the fire. Some said, maybe it'll make things easier. Others said, easier for who? For them, not for us. But John's voice was quiet when he finally spoke. A machine can swing a hammer, he said, but it don't know why it swings it. It don't feel the earth tremble. It don't bleed. And it sure don't sing. No one had an answer to that. It was the spring of '69 when John's crew was sent to Big Bend Tunnel, the largest mountain cut the railroad had ever attempted in the South. The air there was thick with dust and hope. Men came from every corner of the country, chasing wages and rumor, and the rumor was that Big Bend was cursed. They said the mountain was alive, that it swallowed men whole. Every week someone disappeared in a cave-in or a blast gone wrong, but the company didn't stop. They just sent more men. When John arrived, the crew chief, a sharp-eyed man named Captain Moore, looked him up and down and said, You're the one they talk about, the hammer man. John nodded once. Moore spat into the dirt. Good, maybe you'll last longer than the rest. The work at Big Bend was brutal. The tunnels were narrow and hot, the air filled with grit and smoke. Men coughed until they spat blood. Some quit. Some didn't make it out at all. But every morning, John's hammer rang through the dark. Tink, tink, boom. He worked side by side with Samuel and the others, drilling deeper into the mountain with every song. His voice echoed off the stone walls. This old hammer killed John Henry, but it won't kill me. The men laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. There was something in the way. John said it like he already knew his fate. One night, deep inside the tunnel, a gas pocket exploded. The blast shook the ground, sending smoke and flame bursting from the tunnel mouth. Men screamed, tools flew, timbers cracked. John was inside when it happened. When the smoke cleared, the foreman shouted for survivors. Out of the darkness came a single figure, staggering through the haze, John Henry, dragging 2 men out with one arm, blood running down his face. He laid them on the ground, coughed, and said hoarsely, The mountain's still breathing. We best finish the job. From that day on, the men said the mountain feared him. And in truth, it did seem to tremble whenever he raised that hammer. It was only weeks later when a wagon rolled into camp, carrying a strange machine. A black iron contraption, tall as 2 men, with pipes and pistons and a coal furnace that hissed like a serpent. The company men followed, grinning, as if they'd brought salvation. Gentlemen, one of them said, meet the future. He patted the machine's side. This beauty can drill 10 feet of rock in half the time it takes your best man. Soon, you'll be swinging in the saloons, not in the tunnels. The men didn't cheer. They just looked at John. John wiped his hands, walked over, and studied the thing. The steel mouth, the gears, the black smoke curling from its belly. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. He knew. He looked up at the company man and said, quiet but clear, Let's see if that thing can sing. The foreman frowned. You're not thinking. But the camp was already buzzing. Whispers flew from man to man. John Henry's gonna challenge the machine. That night, under the cold stars, the camp came alive with nervous excitement. Some said it was foolish, no man could beat a machine. Others said it was destiny. Samuel found John sitting alone, sharpening his hammerhead with a file. You don't have to do this, he said softly. John looked up, eyes dark as coal. I was born with this hammer in my hand. If I don't swing it now, what was it all for? He stood, the firelight painting his muscles in bronze and shadow. Tomorrow, he said, we see what a man's worth. Morning came heavy and red. The sun rose like a burning coin through the mist above Big Bend, spilling light on the black mouth of the tunnel where men had bled and sweated for months. The air carried the scent of coal, sweat, and something else, anticipation. Word had spread beyond the camp by dawn. Railmen from miles away came to see it. Farmers left their fields. Miners brought their wives and children. They all wanted to witness what folks whispered about. Man versus machine. By mid-morning, the mountain was alive with voices. Men climbed onto crates and barrels to get a view. The company men stood proud near their new machine, polishing its pipes, feeding its furnace, their white shirts spotless against the dark earth. The foreman, Captain Moore, called for quiet. He was nervous not because of the machine, but because of what would happen if the men's hero lost. If the machine won, it would mean progress. But if John Henry won, it would mean something bigger, something the company couldn't measure in money. And then he came. John Henry walked through the crowd like a storm rolling over the hills. His shirt was open at the chest, his hammer slung across his shoulder, glinting in the morning sun. The men cheered, the women gasped, and even the company men fell silent. There was a weight to him, not arrogance, but certainty. He was the kind of man who didn't need to speak to be heard. Beside him walked Samuel, carrying a bucket of water and a second hammer, the backup, though everyone knew John would never need it. Captain Moore cleared his throat. The contest will be simple, he said. 2 holes side by side. The machine on one, John Henry on the other. Whoever drills the deepest before the whistle blows wins. The company men smirked. Be fair now, one said. Let's not tire your man too soon. We'll give him water and rest breaks. John's deep voice cut through the noise. I don't need no rest. There was a murmur through the crowd. Someone shouted, Go get him, John. Another cried, Show that iron devil what a man can do. John Henry just nodded once. He stepped to the rock face, ran his hand across its rough surface, and whispered something under his breath. Some said he was praying. Others said he was speaking to the mountain itself. The foreman dropped his arm. Begin. The steam drill hissed to life, coughing smoke and steam, pistons driving in and out with a metallic rhythm. The crowd flinched at the sound, loud, harsh, relentless. Then came John's first swing. The hammer came down like thunder. Clang. The mountain shook. He swung again, steady, rhythmic. Each strike sang like music, and before long, the air filled with 2 competing songs, one of iron and steam, and one of flesh and soul. The men began to chant, timing their voices with his hammer. Go, John, go. Go, John, go. Swing that hammer. Don't let up slow. Sweat poured down his back, his muscles shining in the heat. The steam drill hissed and spat, keeping pace. Sparks flew from both sides, and the air grew thick with dust. Hours passed. The crowd could see the tunnel face changing holes, deepening side by side. The machine hissed louder, the pistons glowing red. John's arms never slowed. His hammer rose and fell, with a terrible grace, not just a man at work, but a living rhythm. Every few minutes, Samuel ran to his side with water. John took a sip, nodded, and kept swinging. He said nothing. He didn't look at the machine. He only looked at the stone, the living, breathing wall he meant to conquer. A man in the crowd whispered, He's not fighting the machine. He's fighting the mountain itself. And maybe that was true. By afternoon, the chants had turned into song. Even those who came to mock began to sing. Women clapped. Children danced in the dust. The mountain echoed with the rhythm of work, the kind that built railroads and broke men. John Henry's voice rose above them all, raw and deep. John Henry said to his captain, A man ain't nothing but a man. But before I let your steam drill beat me down, I'll die with my hammer in my hand. The words rolled like thunder across the valley. The company men stopped smiling. Near dusk, the air shimmered with heat. Smoke poured from the steam drill. Its gears squealed under the strain. The operator shouted, twisting levers, trying to keep it running. John's breaths came heavy now. Each swing drew a groan from deep in his chest. Samuel saw the tremor in his arm just a flicker, but enough. John, he whispered, you can stop. You've already proven it." John didn't stop. He drove the hammer harder, faster, sparks flying like stars. The ground seemed to quake beneath him. Suddenly, a sharp crack split the air. The steam drill's piston burst, hissing molten steam into the dust. The machine screeched to a halt. The crowd gasped. John didn't notice. He struck again, and again, and again. Then silence. The foreman stepped forward, his face pale. He leaned into the tunnel and shouted, "Measure it!" Men ran in with lanterns, their light trembling on the stone. When they came back, they were shouting, almost afraid of their own voices. John Henry drilled 9 feet deeper. 9 feet! The crowd erupted. Cheers roared through the valley. Men lifted their hats, women waved their scarves. Even the foreman couldn't hide his awe. John Henry stood still, the hammer hanging loosely at his side. He smiled once, faint and proud, and whispered, "Told you. A man ain't nothing but a man." Then he stumbled. Samuel caught him before he hit the ground. John's chest rose and fell, but each breath sounded like wind through hollow rock. "John, you did it," Samuel said, his voice shaking. John's eyes opened a little, and he managed a weak grin. "I drove steel for my people, Sam. Don't ever forget that." His hand slipped from the hammer's handle, and the world seemed to hold its breath. When he was gone, even the mountain went quiet. They buried him near the tunnel he'd conquered under a pile of clean-cut stone. The men carved a simple message into the rock. John Henry, the steel-driving man. He beat the machine, and he paid the price. For days, the sound of hammers echoed in the valley, not for work, but for remembrance. Each man struck the stone 3 times before leaving, as if to keep his rhythm alive. And long after the rails were laid, when trains began to roar through that same mountain, the engineers swore they could still hear it. A faint clang, 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 in the dark, like a ghost swinging a hammer, still working, still winning. The mountain lay quiet for a long time after John Henry's hammer fell silent. The wind moved through the tunnel like a sigh, whispering through the cracks where his sweat had dried into the stone. The railroad men finished their work, laid the last rails, and the first train roared through iron wheels screaming over steel tracks, smoke rolling black and endless into the sky. Progress, they called it. But to the men who had watched John Henry swing that hammer, it didn't feel like progress. It felt like loss. They said it was like watching the world shift beneath your boots, the kind of change you can't stop, only survive. When the first train crossed the Big Bend Tunnel, the whole valley came to watch. It was taller than any wagon, longer than any line of horses. The iron wheels shone like teeth. The furnace glowed like a heart of fire. Children clapped and pointed, but the old-timers stood quiet, hats in hand. Some swore they could hear another sound underneath the engine's roar, faint, rhythmic, steady, like the echo of a hammer. Clang, clang, clang. A man named Silas Carter, one of John Henry's old crew, leaned on his shovel and said, "He's still down there, boys, still swinging. Every time that train passes, he's reminding it who came first." The others nodded. They didn't laugh, because they knew it was true in some way. Legends don't die easy. They sink into the earth, and the earth keeps their rhythm. Years rolled on, and so did the trains. The railways stretched across mountains, rivers, plains, a web of steel connecting towns that had never heard each other's names. Factories rose like fortresses, filled with machines that clanged and hissed and spun. Men learned to bow their heads to the noise. They worked beside the machines, fixing them, feeding them, fearing them. But every now and then, when a machine broke or a gear jammed, someone would mutter, "Maybe it's John Henry, setting things right." That name never left the camps. Even men who'd never seen him boys, born years later, grew up hearing it. John Henry became a test of manhood. If you could swing a hammer, if you could work till your hands bled and still keep rhythm, you were a John Henry kind of man. The legend traveled faster than the trains themselves. Ballads carried it from camp to camp, hammered into memory by tired voices around the fire. Sometimes it was a work song, to keep men in rhythm. Sometimes it was a story for children who asked why their father's hands were so rough. And sometimes it was a prayer, muttered under the breath of men who'd lost faith in the companies that owned them. John Henry was a steel-driving man. He died with his hammer in his hand. Lord, Lord. He died with his hammer in his hand. Singers added verses, changed names, shifted rivers and mountains. In one song, he was born in Tennessee. In another, Alabama. In some, he was black. In others, he was every man who ever broke his back against a machine. But the heart of the story never changed. A man faced progress. A man refused to bow. And in the end, he proved that courage wasn't about winning. It was about swinging anyway. The railroad company tried to claim the story too. They printed pamphlets, told reporters that John Henry's victory was proof of American industry. They called him a symbol of progress, not defiance. They left out the part where he died, but the workers remembered differently. To them, he wasn't progress, he was resistance. He was the last man to look a machine in the eye and say, "You can't take my place while I still draw breath." One foreman once said, "If you want to know who John Henry was, listen to a hammer strike stone. That's him. Still working, still proud, still unbent." Years later, Samuel, John's old friend and waterboy, became an old man himself. His hands had curled with age, his back bent like an old rail, but his memory stayed sharp. He'd sit outside the general store in Hinton, Virginia, telling the story to anyone who'd listen. Children would gather around his boots, eyes wide, and he'd begin. "John Henry wasn't the biggest man I ever saw," he'd say, his voice low and rough. "But he was the truest." He swung like he meant to speak to the mountain itself. "And the mountain lord helped me," it answered. Sometimes he'd pause, eyes distant, as if hearing the rhythm again. Clang, clang, clang. One night, a young reporter from a northern newspaper came to see him. He asked, "Do you really believe he died that day, Mr. Samuel?" Samuel smiled faintly. "Son, I was there when he fell, but I don't reckon a man like John Henry ever really dies. He just moves deeper into the rock." As time passed, stories about Big Bend Tunnel turned stranger. Trainmen said that on certain nights when the moon was low and the fog crept along the tracks, they'd hear something beneath the rumble of the wheels. Not a machine. Not the wind. A hammer. Some engineers swore they saw sparks fly from the tunnel's mouth when no train was near. Others said they'd seen a tall shadow in the smoke, shoulders wide as the mountain, a hammer glinting in its hand. Of course, the company called it superstition. But every man who worked that line carried a small token, a chip of stone, a bit of steel, said to keep John Henry on your side. Even the bravest wouldn't whistle inside the tunnel. Not out of fear. Out of respect. By the turn of the century, machines had taken over nearly every job John Henry once did. Steam drills gave way to electric ones. Then came conveyor belts, cranes, dynamite. The world had no room left for hammermen. But still, the story endured. Factory workers in Pittsburgh sang his name over the clang of foundries. Dock workers in New Orleans tapped their tools to his rhythm. Coal miners in West Virginia carved his likeness on the walls of the mines. And through it all, people whispered the same question. Who'll be our John Henry now? By the time Samuel died, the railroads had stretched clear across America. Children rode trains through the mountains their grandfathers had carved open with blood and sweat. Few of them knew the names of the men who built those tunnels, but they knew the song. This hammer killed John Henry. But it won't kill me. Lord, Lord, it won't kill me. In a way, that was the truest ending of all. John Henry wasn't just a man, he was a measure. A line drawn in the dirt between what we build and what we lose. Whenever a man stood up against something too big, too strong, too cruel, people would say, "He's got John Henry's heart in him." And maybe that was enough. If you visit Big Bend Tunnel today, you'll see trains still cutting through the dark. But if you wait until the night grows deep and the air grows still, and you listen closely, you might hear it. A slow, steady rhythm. Hammer against stone. Man against time. Some say it's just the echo of rails. Others say it's more than that. Because somewhere deep in that mountain, a man still swings his hammer. Not out of pride, not out of anger, but because the work isn't finished yet. Time, like a hammer swing, never stops. It arcs, it falls, and with each strike, the sound changes softer here, sharper there, but always the same rhythm underneath. And that's how the story of John Henry survived. Not as a man, not even as a legend, but as a rhythm the world could not unhear. By the early 1900s, the world had turned its hammers into something else. Where once there were mountains to break, there were now cities to build. Skyscrapers rising like new peaks of iron and glass. Men still climbed and swung tools, but now they wore suits instead of dust. And the sound of the hammer was replaced by the click of machines, the hum of wires. And yet, in the factories, in the shipyards, in the fields, the workers still sang John Henry's song. Not because they were driving steel anymore, but because they understood what it meant to work against something larger than themselves. Lord, Lord, the man ain't nothing but flesh and bone. But steel and steam can't break the soul. It was no longer just a ballad about a man versus a machine. It had become something deeper, a cry from the people who built the modern world, a reminder that even in the age of progress, the human heart still beat louder than any piston. When the blues rose up from the Mississippi Delta, the old hammer songs found a new home. The rhythm of the steel drivers, slow, heavy, endless, became the rhythm of the blues. 3 chords, 1 truth, and a voice that refused to stay quiet. You could hear John Henry in the gravel of Leadbelly's voice, in the slide of Son House's guitar, in every stomp of a heel that kept time with pain and pride. In 1939, a young singer named Paul Robeson took the song to the stage. His deep baritone rolled like thunder. John Henry said to his captain, "A man ain't nothing but a man. But before I let that steam drill beat me down, I'll die with this hammer in my hand." Audiences stood and wept. They weren't just hearing a story. They were hearing themselves. Every struggle, every injustice, every time they had to stand against a system that thought it could replace them. The legend had become the voice of a people. During World War II, soldiers sang John Henry as they built bridges, hauled artillery, dug trenches. He became a ghost that followed them to foreign lands, a reminder of the strength that comes not from steel, but from will. In the Navy yards, black and white men worked side by side, and the foreman noticed that the rhythm of the work changed when the song started. It became steadier, faster, alive. Even the machines seemed to move smoother when someone hummed. This old hammer killed John Henry, and though few said it out loud, they all knew. They were fighting a different kind of machine now, one made of hate, war, and greed. But the lesson was the same. Keep swinging. After the war, machines came back stronger than ever. Typewriters replaced pens. Assembly lines replaced craftsmen. Computers humming, blinking, calculating, replaced thought itself. People no longer swung hammers, they pushed buttons. But the exhaustion felt the same. The distance between man and work had grown wider, colder. Some said John Henry's story didn't matter anymore, that it belonged to another age. But others, poets, musicians, dreamers, disagreed. A writer named Rourke Bradford said, "Every time a man is asked to move faster than his soul allows, John Henry rises again." And he was right. Then came the 1,960 seconds, a time when America itself was being hammered into a new shape. Freedom marches echoed through the streets, voices rising like steel drivers in the tunnels of old. They sang, "Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round." And the rhythm, if you listened close, was the same as the hammer's fall. Somewhere between Selma and Montgomery, between heartbreak and hope, John Henry's spirit found new life. He wasn't just the worker anymore. He was the protester, the marcher, the man standing before tanks, holding nothing but his conviction. One preacher told his congregation, "John Henry swung a hammer for his people. We swing our words, our votes, our courage. Different tools, same fight." And the crowd shouted back, "Amen." By the 1,980 seconds, Big Ben Tunnel was nearly forgotten. Just another landmark along a highway where tourists stopped to take pictures and move on. But every now and then, a traveler would step off the road, walk down to the old tracks, and listen. Some said you could still hear a faint clang under the rumble of trains. Others said you could feel it in your chest, a vibration, like a second heartbeat. The locals didn't talk about it much, but they kept the legend alive in small ways, naming their stores Hammer Cafe, painting murals of a broad-shouldered man with a steel tool in his hand, eyes blazing like coal. Then came the digital age. Machines that didn't just move or build, but thought. They wrote, they calculated, they made art. And once again, people asked the old question, what happens to the workers now? Some said the story of John Henry had finally reached its end. That no one could challenge something that didn't bleed, didn't tire, didn't forget. But others, the artists, the builders, the stubborn dreamers, knew better. They said, the hammer just changed shape. Maybe it's a keyboard. Maybe it's a code editor. Maybe it's a guitar. But it's still in human hands, and it still beats to the same rhythm. Resistance. In 2015, an astronaut aboard the International Space Station played a recording of The Ballad of John Henry. He said it reminded him of home, of gravity, of labor, of Earth. He floated above a world of machines, and somewhere down below, a train crossed the old Big Ben Tunnel. The sound reached no one, yet it was heard by all. Even in orbit, the legend lived. A story about a man who fought a machine, told by machines, stored on machines, listened to through machines, and still, somehow, it was human. Every generation has its John Henry. For some, he's a man swinging a hammer. For others, a woman coding through the night. A migrant building homes he'll never live in. A nurse working double shifts. A teacher refusing to give up on a child. A protester standing in front of power and saying, no. They all share that same fire. That same beat that began in a tunnel under a mountain a century and a half ago. Clang, clang, clang. The rhythm is older than the railroad. Older than the machines. It's the sound of defiance. and of belonging. A folk singer once said, "You can't kill a song that's honest." And so John Henry keeps singing. In folk festivals and street corners, in hip-hop verses and rock riffs, his story keeps returning, reinvented, reborn. Sometimes he's a bluesman, sometimes a labor hero, sometimes a metaphor for the human spirit itself. But no matter how the song changes, the last verse always feels the same. John Henry said to his captain, "Before this machine can take my hand, I'll drive my hammer one more time and make the mountain understand." The world today moves faster than any steam drill could dream. Data pulses like fire, cities hum like engines, and we've forgotten the sound of stone breaking under sweat. But the hammer still echoes, sometimes in the smallest acts, sometimes in the loudest revolutions. And somewhere, deep beneath all the progress and the noise, John Henry still swings. Maybe not with muscle, maybe not with steel, but with heart, always with heart. The world forgets many things. Names fade, tracks rust, songs get buried beneath noise and progress. But some stories, some rhythms, refuse to die. John Henry's is one of them, because his story isn't about the hammer, or the tunnel, or even the mountain. It's about something deeper. The moment when a human heart stands up against the impossible and says, "Not today." There's a little cafe off the highway near Hinton, Virginia. Most folks drive past it without noticing a leaning building, old signs fading in the sun, a wooden porch that creaks like an old song. But if you step inside late in the evening, when the air smells like coffee and dust, you'll sometimes find a man sitting near the corner window with a guitar on his knee. He doesn't look like much gray hair, tired eyes, but when he plays, the whole room quiets. He strums a slow, steady rhythm, and his voice carries the weight of the past. John Henry was a steel-driven man. Lord, Lord, he died with his hammer in his hand. Some people hum along, some just listen. And when the song ends, the man always says the same thing. Don't matter if it's true. What matters is, it feels true. That's what keeps a story alive. Every generation inherits a hammer. Sometimes it's made of steel. Sometimes it's made of words, ideas, courage. When the storyteller puts down his guitar, a young woman at the counter picks it up. She plays the same tune, but softer, her voice trembling like a spark. She's never swung a hammer in her life. But when she sings the chorus, her voice carries the same fire that lived in John Henry's chest. Because the hammer isn't in the hands, it's in the will. It's in the decision to try when you know you might fail. It's in the faith that effort still matters, even in the age of machines. That's what John Henry passed down. Not a tool, not a legend, but a heartbeat that refuses to stop. Outside the cafe, the old tracks still cut through the hills. Trains don't run as often now, not since the cargo lines moved west. But the rails remain, dark and glinting, like scars on the land. If you walk far enough, you'll find the entrance to Big Bend Tunnel. It's boarded up now. Too dangerous, they say. But sometimes, if you put your ear against the stone, you can hear something faint. A pulse deep within the mountain. A heartbeat made of echo and time. Clang, clang, clang. The locals don't talk about it much. They say it's the old drills settling, or maybe water dripping through rock. But if you stay long enough, you'll know better. It's him, still working, still singing. In a museum in Washington, D.C., there's an old steam drill. Rusted, silent, its once bright metal dulled to gray. A little plaque beside it reads, "Steam drill, circa 1869. Said to have competed with a man named John Henry. Legend holds that the man won but died in victory. Children press their hands against the glass. Parents read the words aloud. Most move on. But if you look closely, you'll see something strange. The machine's surface bears deep dents, as if someone had once struck it. Again and again with a hammer. No one knows if it's true, but it feels right, somehow, that even the machine carries the memory of being challenged, of being spoken to. As if, in some quiet corner of the mechanical world, the machine remembers the man who made it tremble. The future came like a train without brakes. AI, automation, algorithms, all roaring forward, faster than any locomotive ever did. People built machines that could compose symphonies, paint portraits, write stories, and still, the question returned. The same one whispered on the mountain a century ago. What happens to the human hand when the hammer no longer needs it? But the answer, if you listen closely, hasn't changed. It's the same rhythm, the same defiance. Because the story of John Henry isn't about fighting machines. It's about reminding them who made them. It's about the soul behind the code, the song behind the signal, Even now, when a human heart creates something with love, somewhere, the mountain hums in approval. In Brooklyn, a young musician samples the old folk song and turns it into a slow, thundering beat. In Alabama, a teacher reads it aloud to her class and asks, "What does it mean to you?" And in Silicon Valley, an engineer writes a note on his whiteboard. John Henry didn't lose. He proved we could still matter. Everywhere, in small ways, the hammer keeps swinging. Not out of rage, out of remembrance. Because people don't sing about machines. They sing about the ones who stood before them and dared to swing. One summer evening, a boy walking the tracks finds an old hammerhead half buried in dirt. He doesn't know what it is at first, just a piece of iron, cold and heavy. He takes it home, cleans it, keeps it by his bed. Sometimes he imagines he hears a heartbeat in it when he can't sleep. He grows up, becomes a builder, then an architect. One day, while designing a bridge, he carves into the cornerstone a single line, built by hands that still remember. He never tells anyone where it came from, but when the first train rolls across his bridge, he swears he hears, for just a moment, the faint ring of a hammer from long ago. At the edge of time, when the world has more data than stars, an old songwriter sits by his window, staring at the blinking lights of a city that never sleeps. He writes with a digital pen, but his words are ancient. They say John Henry died with his hammer in his hand. Maybe so, but maybe that hammer's still moving. Through us, through every act of creation that says, "I am still here." He saves the file, uploads it to the endless cloud. Somewhere, across the world, someone reads it. And in that brief moment, the rhythm begins again. Stories, like hammers, are meant to be lifted. They gain their meaning only when someone takes hold and swings. John Henry's swing was strength. Ours might be words, kindness, courage, truth. Different hammers. Same fight. He never asked to be a legend. He just worked. He just cared enough to give everything he had to the task before him. And maybe that's why the mountain listened. Because the mountain always listens to those who give their all. Some say John Henry's buried in the sand. Lord, Lord, with a silver hammer in his hand. But every time a train rolls through, the mountain hums his name to you. The song fades, but the rhythm lingers. In the chest, in the bones, in the long silence after the music stops. Because John Henry is not gone. He's the sound of every person who ever stood tall against something too big, too fast, too certain. He's not the past. He's the pulse of what remains human. Epilogue, the last hammer stroke. When you leave the cafe that night, the world feels a little quieter. The stars hang low, the rails glint faintly in the dark. You walk past the tracks, and just as you turn away, you hear it faint, distant, but unmistakable. Clang, clang, clang. You stop, smile, and whisper, "Swing on, John. Swing on." And somewhere deep under the mountain, a man smiles back. The hammer rises. The rhythm returns. And the legend lives forever. The mountain was quiet now. The smoke had cleared. The echo of hammers, once the heartbeat of the valley, had faded into silence. But the people still stood there, long after the sun went down. No one wanted to leave the tunnel. They looked at the place where John Henry had fallen, right beside the steel he'd driven through with his own hands. And in the dust beside him, his hammer still gleamed faintly in the dying light, warm as if the fire of his soul still lived inside it. They buried him near the mountain that took his breath. No fancy marker, no marble stone, just a wooden cross and a hammer laid on top. The men sang low while they worked, voices heavy but proud. John Henry died with a hammer in his hand. Lord, Lord. He died with a hammer in his hand. And as they sang, the rhythm rose again, slow, steady, unbroken. It was the same rhythm he had taught them. Work in time. Breathe between the strikes. Sing to carry the pain. Weeks turned to months, and the railroad stretched farther west. The new machines rolled in taller, faster, colder, and men began to vanish from the work lines, replaced by gears and pistons. But every now and then, when the drills struck stone too deep or the gears jammed with dust, someone would say, "Feels like John Henry's still down there, keeping us honest." And the men would nod, take up their hammers, and sing again. Because no machine could sing. No machine could sweat. No machine could die for pride. They say that sometimes, on still nights, when the moon is low and the wind runs down the mountain, you can hear it faint, like thunder rolling underground. The rhythm of hammer on steel. The heartbeat of a man who refused to let a machine take his soul. Some call it a ghost. Some call it memory. But to the men who still work with their hands, miners, smiths, builders, dreamers, it's something else. It's a promise. A promise that as long as there are people who sweat, who sing, who fight to stay human in a world of iron, John Henry's song will never die. And so the legend traveled from mountain to mountain, from campfire to tavern, from father to son. They changed the verses, added new lines, but the heart stayed the same. It wasn't just a story about strength anymore. It was about the cost of progress, about the dignity of work, about what it means to be human in the age of machines. And somewhere, in the echo of every hammer strike, the old refrain still lives. This old hammer, it rings like silver. This old hammer, it shines like gold. If I die with my hammer in my hand, Lord, I'll make that mountain roll.